When tracing is enabled, your application will automatically gather information about every request that it receives. This information can be extremely useful when analyzing your application's performance or trying to determine the source of an error. Note that the trace constant is completely unrelated to the tracing features that you will use in this lesson. The tracing features will work regardless of whether the trace constant is present or not. You learned about the trace constant in Lesson 6.3. To begin this lesson, open the Mathland project from your Sample Files folder. And open primes.aspx in Design View. Now click the drop-down menu in the Properties window and select Document. To enable tracing on this page, set the Trace property to True. You will also notice the Trace Mode property. Trace Mode simply controls how tracing information is sorted, either by category or by time. If you don't set this property, the information will be sorted by category. Now view primes.aspx in your web browser to see the new tracing information. When the page loads, scroll down, and you'll see a huge amount of extra information. This information includes everything from the information that the user sent to the server to the amount of time that it took for each method to execute. Close your web browser now. And next, you're going to enable tracing for the entire application. Open web.config and add the following code inside the system.web tag. Trace enabled equals true, page output equals true, local only equals true, request limit equals 10. This tag enables tracing for your entire application. The page output property allows the tracing information to appear on the pages, as you saw in the previous step. Setting local only to true means that tracing will only be visible to users who are using the application from the web server itself. It won't be visible to users on the internet. Finally, the request limit property limits the number of requests that are stored in the trace log. In this case, only the last 10 requests will be logged. If you wanted to save tracing information to a file, you could set the Write to Diagnostics Trace property to True when adding the trace tag to your web.config file. All tracing information will then be automatically sent to the system.diagnostics.trace class. You learned about the trace class in Lesson 6.8. You can then add a listener to save the information to a file. You learned about listeners in Lesson 6.9. View default.aspx in your web browser now. Tracing information appears below the page and will now appear on every page in the application. While this is useful, it only displays information about your own requests, and only the request that you made for this page. It would be more useful if you could see every request that has been logged. You can do this with the Trace Viewer. To access the Trace Viewer, use your web browser's address bar to navigate to trace.axd. The Trace Viewer tool appears. Trace.axd is only available if tracing is enabled. The Trace Viewer shows you the request that your web browser sent for default.aspx. You might expect that the browser would send more requests in order to retrieve CSS and JavaScript files. However, Internet Explorer keeps a cached copy of these files after receiving them for the first time, meaning that they do not need to be requested again. It is possible that you will see requests for these files if you are not working through the course sequentially. You can view the full details of every request in the Trace Viewer by clicking the View Details links. Note that you can add your own custom information to the trace by using the page.trace class in your C# code. This is useful when you want to mark specific areas of code or check time intervals. To add information to the trace log, use the page.trace.write and page.trace.warn methods. The only difference between write and warn is that messages sent with warn are shown in red. Close your web browser now, and close Visual Studio. You've now completed Lesson 6.10, Enable Tracing.